Welcome to the Restricted Handling Podcast. This is what's been going on in China in the past 24 hours. China is still dealing with the aftershocks from Venezuela, but the vibe has shifted again, and this is where it gets interesting. Yesterday, we talked about the shock turning into recalculation, and today, that recalculation is clearly moving from internal diagnosis to external adjustment. Beijing isn't relitigating how the U.S. grabbed Nicolas Maduro anymore. That chapter is closed. What's happening now is much more pragmatic. China is quietly absorbing the lesson and adjusting posture elsewhere, so it doesn't look flat-footed twice in the same week. What's new today is how explicitly China is signaling strength in other theaters to offset that embarrassment. The loudest example is Japan. We mentioned yesterday that the dual-use export ban was already rattling Tokyo. Today, the contours are sharper. Chinese officials still haven't released a list, on purpose, but state-linked voices are now openly framing rare earths as under review. That's not a policy announcement. It's a warning shot. Heavy rare earths are a pressure point Japan knows all too well, and Beijing is leaning into ambiguity the way it always does when it wants maximum leverage with minimum commitment. Markets reacted again. Japanese officials escalated their protests, and China followed up by keeping the tourism and seafood pressure dialed up. This is no longer just signaling displeasure, it's sustained economic friction. At the same time, China is backing that economic pressure with visible military confidence. Over the past day, the PLA Navy pushed 4 Type 055 destroyers into live-fire drills in the Yellow Sea. This is an escalation in tone compared to what we discussed yesterday about normalization around Japan. These are not routine frigates cruising through straits. These are the biggest surface combatants China operates, running anti-ship and land attack drills. It's a reminder that while Beijing may have looked constrained in the Western Hemisphere, it still feels very comfortable flexing in its own neighborhood. If yesterday was about conditioning, today is about reminding everyone who owns the local soundtrack. Taiwan remains the connective tissue between almost all of this. Yesterday, we talked about the justice mission drills and the disruption they caused to flights and shipping. Today, we have more clarity on just how layered that operation was. Taiwan's security agencies are now emphasizing that the military activity was only half the story. The other half was digital. Over 4 million cyber intrusions were logged during the exercise window, hitting everything from government systems to hospitals and energy infrastructure. At the same time, tens of thousands of coordinated disinformation posts flooded social platforms, many of them AI-generated. This wasn't just noise, it was timing. The drills created anxiety, and the information campaign exploited it. This is pressure designed to feel constant, not climactic. And it's not just Taiwan feeling that cyber pressure. The United States is still digesting confirmation that Chinese-linked hackers compromised email systems used by staffers on several powerful House committees. Yesterday, this was breaking news. Today, the focus is on what it says about priorities. These weren't random targets. China-focused committees, armed services, intelligence, this is collection aligned with decision-making. Beijing is denying it, of course, but the pattern fits a long-running approach. Probe quietly, collect context, and stay just below the threshold that forces a dramatic response. It's espionage with a very familiar accent. Energy is where yesterday's Venezuela story keeps evolving. China is now fully in mitigation mode. The loss of discounted Venezuelan crude isn't catastrophic, but it's inconvenient, especially for independent refiners that live on thin margins. Today's reporting makes clear Beijing is leaning harder on Iranian and Russian supply while floating storage buys time. This isn't a scramble, it's a controlled pivot. Still, the broader message from Washington landed. The U.S. just demonstrated it's willing to combine force, law enforcement, and energy leverage in one move. China noticed, and so did a lot of other capitals. Which brings us to diplomacy, where Beijing is very deliberately broadening the frame. Prime Minister Mark Carney's upcoming visit to China is getting more attention today inside Chinese commentary. This isn't being treated as just a trade meeting. It's being framed as proof that U.S. allies are hedging. After years of frozen ties and tariffs, a Canadian Prime Minister showing up in Beijing is useful symbolism. China doesn't need Canada to choose sides. It just needs proof that Washington doesn't have a monopoly on alignment. Africa fits into that same narrative. Wang Yi's tour continues, and today the Somalia stop is drawing more analysis. China hasn't sent a foreign minister there in decades, and the location matters. Somalia sits astride key shipping lanes near the Red Sea, at a moment when that region is unstable and crowded with naval forces. Beijing is presenting itself as a steady, non-interventionist partner, while quietly reinforcing access and influence. No speeches about democracy, no lectures, just presence. South Asia is another place where China is reinforcing relationships rather than expanding them. The renewed security cooperation with Pakistan, which we touched on yesterday, now has more structure: joint working groups, expanded police training, deeper cyber coordination. This comes as Pakistan cautiously reopens channels with Washington. Beijing sees the hedging and is responding the way it always does, with reassurance and reminders of shared history and investment. On the technology front, today's developments sharpen yesterday's theme of tightening control. China's decision to formally scrutinize Meta's AI acquisition isn't about Meta alone. It's about reminding foreign firms that data, algorithms, and ownership are strategic assets inside China. At the same time, NVIDIA demanding full upfront payment for advanced AI chips tells you how uncertain this environment has become. Neither side trusts the other to keep the rules stable. That lack of trust is now baked into contracts. At sea, China's global naval posture continues to quietly adjust. We mentioned yesterday that all 3 aircraft carriers are back in port after a busy year. What stands out today is how China is stretching fewer ships over longer distances. Escort missions near the Gulf of Aden are now lasting close to a year. This isn't because China suddenly loves endurance cruises. It's because the same destroyers are needed closer to home. Taiwan, Japan, the South China Sea all compete for the same hulls. Beijing is managing scarcity, not abundance. Internally, the clampdown we discussed yesterday is still rolling. Another senior official is now formally under investigation, reinforcing that the anti-corruption campaign isn't easing up in 2026. As external pressure increases, internal discipline tightens. That's a pattern as old as the party itself. And finally, China is putting points on the board where it can. The extradition of a major alleged scam operator from Cambodia to China is being showcased heavily in state media today. It reinforces Beijing's narrative that it's a leader in transnational law enforcement, even as it quietly sidelines U.S. legal claims. Influence doesn't always look like warships or tariffs. Sometimes it looks like who gets custody. Thanks so much for listening and for being part of the RH community. If you enjoyed this episode, subscribing, leaving a quick 5-star review, or sharing it with someone you know makes a huge difference. It's how this network will grow. We also publish a daily written intel brief on Substack, where you'll find even deeper coverage of Russia and China, along with insights on the Middle East and the DPRK. This is free for Substack subscribers. Starting January 16th, new Substack subscribers will move to a paid model. If you're already subscribed on Substack before then, nothing changes. You'll keep full access to everything, free, forever. New subscribers after January 15th will receive the daily written brief, weekly deep dives on economics, sanctions, and more for a monthly fee. So if you're not on Substack yet, don't worry. Just head to restrictedhandling.com and subscribe now for free and get the content free forever.